How do we bring them back, right? And we talked about some different plans to do so. We talked about how Lincoln, before he died, had a 10% plan, where 10% of a state has to take a loyalty pledge, they have to abolish slavery, and then they can be readmitted. Why would a state want to be readmitted? A state would want that because then they have political power again. They can send politicians to Congress to vote for laws or to have a voice in the Congress. So they want that now that the war is going to be over. Okay? So that's Lincoln's 10% plan. In Congress, though, we are having a growing group of people called the Radical Republicans. They want to punish the Southern leaders by taking away all of their political rights. They want to help the freedmen using the power of the national government, and they want to make it more difficult to readmit the Southern states. However, Lincoln is dead, and Congress has to debate what they're actually going to do to put the country back together. So, in the beginning, who's in charge of Reconstruction? It's not Lincoln. It's not the congressman. It's the new president, President Johnson. Remember, Johnson is a Southerner, and while he doesn't like secession, he doesn't like the national government telling states to give more rights to African Americans. And so he's going to pardon or forgive Southern leaders as they ask for it. And this really disappoints radical Republicans. So he is basically forgiving all these Southern leaders, and Southern state leaders rush back into power quickly, and they begin passing laws called Black Codes that basically recreate the system of slavery, but without calling it slavery. And the radical Republicans are horrified by this, right? This is not what they wanted. They wanted to change society in the South. They wanted to give more rights to African Americans, and that's not happening. So later on in the year, when radical Republicans do have power again, they start using their power to immediately help African Americans by passing laws like the Freedmen's Bureau. What did that do? Gives education, gives medical care. How? By sending Northerners to the South to help the people there. Remember, the Southerners had a nickname for these people. What did they call them? Carpetbaggers. So this is a nickname to make fun of the Northerners coming down to the South to help the freedmen. Okay? White Southerners do not like the carpetbaggers. They also passed laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This is trying to get rid of black codes and trying to give citizenship rights to African Americans. Citizenship rights include things like being able to vote, have to hold political office, to own property, to sue people in court, stuff like that. But the Republicans are afraid that if you pass this law, another Congress could come later and pass a new law to just get rid of this. So what's a more sturdy and long-lasting legislation that they can pass to make sure citizenship rights don't go away? An amendment, and it's specifically going to be the 14th Amendment. So this gives citizenship rights, and specifically birthright citizenship. So if you're born in the United States, you automatically become a citizen of the U.S. That's the 14th Amendment. And if you really want to get into it, this overturns Dred Scott. The Dred Scott case. Because what did Dred Scott case say about African Americans? said they couldn't be citizens, and it claimed that slaves were property. So this gets rid of that court case. Okay, that cannot be decided now because of the 14th Amendment. What does Johnson think about these laws? It's bad. He doesn't like this. So what can a president try to do to stop a law from happening? He could try to veto the law, and he does. He does veto these laws, but Congress can go around him again by overriding the veto, which they do. So these do pass, but not through the help of the president. And they're getting so sick of the president that eventually they come up with a new plan that totally takes him out of it. Remember, this is the Reconstruction Act. Where they do things like they say, oh, states need to be, in order to be readmitted, they have to pass the 14th Amendment. They have to allow the U.S. Army in the South. And they have to do these certain things in order to be readmitted and brought back into the U.S. What does Johnson think about this plan? Doesn't like it. He tries to veto this one too. And this is Congress's kind of last straw. Congress decides they're going to try to get rid of the president. How can they do that? They can do that through impeachment. And so you try to impeach the president by claiming he's broken a law. So they make up a random law they know he'll break, the Tenure of Office Act. The actual law itself doesn't matter to us, but the point is he broke a technical law, and they said, oh, he broke the law, let's get rid of him. And are they successful? No, they're one vote short, so they are not successful in kicking him out. However, he's not going to run for president later that year. So he did this because he was getting in the way of Reconstruction. Okay. Questions about this so far? This has kind of been the fight between Johnson and the Radical Republicans. Okay. When we get into this time period, it's important to look at the effects on African Americans during this time. We already mentioned black codes, but we haven't mentioned the kind of economic situation that many African Americans are put into. That's sharecropping. Sharecropping is where you are working the land, the crops on the plantation, and at the end of the year, the idea is that the African American workers get a share, like say 50% of the crop, and the landowner gets 50% of the crop. However, at the end of the year, the landowner would take certain deductions from that crop. So they say, like, well, you lived on our land, so we're taking away 20% of it for rent, and 10% away for food, and 10% away for tools, and 20% away because we took away or because you made a mistake or you didn't follow the rules. This often leads to a cycle of debt. It's very difficult to get out of. Typically, they're working for the people who once enslaved them. On the same land that they were once enslaved. However, while economically many African Americans are struggling, once the 14th Amendment and the Civil Rights Act are passed, we do see a change in political rights for African Americans. Like in the election of 1868, who wins that election? The presidential election? It's Grant. And it's the first election where African American men can vote. Okay, it's the first election that black men can vote. We're also seeing many black men become politicians. And with the new Reconstruction Acts, black politicians are going to be at the center of basically remaking the government, of uh, rewriting the state constitutions in these states. Um, and what we see early on, at least in 1868, 1872, many states have lots of new black voters, and a lot of white Southerners still can't vote because they didn't take the loyalty pledge or something like that. So Republicans are gaining a lot of power in the Southern states, which is going to make white Southerners really upset. There's a group of white Southerners called Redeemers. They're leaders of the South who were in charge of the Confederacy, large plantation owners. They had political power before the war, and now they don't have any political rights. Under the Reconstruction Acts, they can't vote, they can't become politicians. They don't like this. So what happens is over time, they do start to gain some political rights. For example, state governments are beginning to give some political rights back to the Redeemers. And eventually, in the 1870s, all the Redeemers get all their political rights back. And so, as the Redeemers begin to come back into power, they begin trying to take away political power from African Americans, specifically voting rights. What are some ways that states and governments took away voting rights from black men? Poll tax, right, where you have to own land or pay a tax to vote, which is difficult when you're in sharecropping and in a cycle of debt. What else? Literacy tests. So either proving you have a certain education, which schools would deny enrollment to African Americans, or you have to take this test, which is basically like the hardest quiz you've ever taken on civics and government stuff, which is difficult for anybody, much less to people whose education opportunities are being denied to. But what about like if you're white and you're poor, or you're white and you're uneducated? So they create these rules called the grandfather clauses. That basically says, well, if your grandpa could vote in the year 1866, then you don't need to take the tax or the test. You don't need to pay the tax. So it's not explicitly saying that black people can't vote, but they know the effect and the impact will mostly hurt black men. Because remember, a new amendment has been added to the Constitution, the 15th Amendment, that says that your race or your fact that you used to be a slave cannot be used against you to vote. And here they're trying to use the grandfather clause to get around that. So sometimes it's asked, well, Ms. Barth, I get the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments confused. How do you remember them? I remember them by making a little sentence. The 13th Amendment gives freedom to African Americans. 14th Amendment gives citizenship rights. And 15th Amendment gives voting rights. So, free citizens vote. I make a little sentence out of it. That's how I remember 13, 14, 15, in which order. These are three amendments we need to know. I think out of all the amendments, this is three of the top 5 amendments that we need to know for this whole class right here. Let's see. Now, ultimately, the North is going to get kind of sick of Reconstruction, bored of it, too expensive. It's been too long. And ultimately, in the election of 1876, it's a very close election, right? There's debates over fraud and if there's corruption, stuff like that. And so to end that debate, they come up with a compromise of 1877. And whenever there's a compromise, both sides get something. So what does the North get? They get Hayes, the Republican, as president. Okay. And what does the South get? Military out of the South. With the military out of the South, this essentially means that Reconstruction is now over. Now, Hayes himself is not really big on the national government doing a lot, right? He had a home rule policy or a let him alone policy. So really, either way, I think Reconstruction was on the way out. And all of the work that the radical Republicans were doing to punish the South and to help the freedmen is all going to go away. The Freedmen's Bureau is going to go away. The Redeemers, who are instituting poll taxes and literacy tests, are going to gain more power, and they're going to use more to take away voting rights from African Americans. Just thinking about what other things I missed and I just didn't put into the correct order. With the Redeemers, we also see the growth of the KKK. Their main goal is to take away political power from Republicans in the South, mostly African American freedmen who are now able to vote, and the carpetbaggers who are coming down to the South. So they're going to use violence and intimidation to do this. Grant doesn't like this. And I remember the law that he uses to go against the KKK? Enforcement Act. Basically where he says, well, the Army's already down there. And if they hear about stuff like this, like the KKK lynching or something, the Army's going to go and stop it. Now, are they successful in convicting people, putting people in jail? No. However, it does lead the membership levels of the KKK to drop significantly, and the membership levels will be down very low until we get to the 1910s. It doesn't mean there's not going to be still lynchings throughout the rest of the 1800s. Unfortunately, even with the KKK gone, racialized lynching will continue for the rest of the century. I think that's it. Questions from your study guide? Anything I didn't cover? Any questions? Going once. Going twice, going thrice.